computer is picking up a strange signal. Here, sir, you better take a look at it.
Hi, and welcome to Sci-Fi Snacks. I'm Liz J. Bradley, a science fiction author and poet who adores short fiction and snacks. Each episode of Sci-Fi Snacks is a short and sweet, or salty, discussion of what I loved, what I learned, and what I snacked on while reading new-to-me short science fiction. As always, links to the short stories are in the show notes, so if you haven't read this week's story, head on over, pick up your favorite snack, and then join me as we discuss this week's story. Season 2, welcome back! If this is your first experience with Sci-Fi Snacks, I cannot wait for you to join the conversation about these amazing sci-fi short stories and also, let's be honest, the really good snacks. Half the reason I do this podcast is it's an excuse to curl up and read and snack on really tasty things and also run my mouth here at the podcast recording studio and give my opinions on all things. And if there's anything I love, it's having an opinion. If you're new here, welcome. If you have already listened to season 1, welcome back. Thank you for sticking around. When I was planning, I decided that I wanted to come up with a theme for season 2. So season 1, we read stories that were all written by women in science fiction. Because as a woman in science fiction, I always want to read more from my demographic, see that representation. And it was amazing. It was so great. I read so many more magazines. I read more widely than I'm used to. Found some really amazing authors that I now follow on social media, and I've read other things by them. We're going to have maybe 1 or 2 in this season as well because I just can't get enough of their gorgeous writing. But for season 2, I wanted to open this up to a broader theme. And one of the things that I keep seeing writing calls for are things like cyberpunk or solar punk. And I was writing a novel and I went and did some research and was trying to figure out how to query it and where it fit in the market. And I was told that it was Hopepunk. And I was like, well, what's that? And I realized there was so much I didn't know about all of these dash punk genres. And so I said, that's season 2 for me. So we are going to dive in, and each week we are going to look at a different version of a punk genre in science fiction. We'll have some crossover into fantasy. We're going to have a graphic novel comic book at one point. Lots of really, really cool stuff in store for us in season 2. So I'm super happy that you are here to join me on this ride. Now, for our first episode, I decided we are going to start things out on kind of a happy note. In terms of the world, it's not always so great, but then we have these moments like yesterday, the announcement of Taylor Swift's engagement brought me a lot of hope. And, this episode is going to go live in a couple of weeks, so this is probably old news to everyone by now. But that was this little glimmer of hope and joy in my world. And I was like, we need to start with the Hopepunk short story. This one was recommended to me by another author, and I really love this subgenre. Not just because I wrote a whole novel in this subgenre without realizing it, but because the definition of Hopepunk is a subgenre of speculative fiction conceived of as the opposite of grimdark. Works in a Hopepunk subgenre are about characters fighting for positive change, radical kindness, and a communal response to challenges. It just resonates with me so much. I feel like that's what we need. And, you see it all the time on the internet nowadays where, joy is a radical choice. And it is. When the world can be a really scary, dark place and there are a lot of things that are out of our control, I feel like having hope for a future, that is radical. That's punk. It's easy to be cynical. To be hopeful takes strength. It takes courage. And I really love that through the lens of literature. It really resonates with me as a person. I think that's kind of why my book fell into that space, was I was looking for joy in a time where there wasn't a lot. I started that book during COVID, during pandemic lockdown. And for me, I said, I'm going to put everything that brings me joy into this book. And it really kind of shone through in the end, this emphasis on community and hope for the future and just not giving up, even because if you give up, the bad guys win. All right. I have kind of settled into a format for these episodes, but it's been a while since I recorded one. So we may figure out what groove feels well with us. We'll probably always start with a definition there. And now I'm going to talk to you about the story itself that we've chosen for this week. This week, the story is called A Seance in the Anthropocene. And this was in Imagine 2200, so like 2200. Climate Fiction for Future Ancestors by Fix, Grist's Solutions Lab. This was sponsored by the NRDC.org, which is the National Resources Defense Council here in the United States. Now, this isn't your typical literary magazine, which I thought was kind of a really interesting place for a story like this, working with this organization to create stories for future ancestors. I loved that little bit there. So it made a lot of sense that this was kind of a Hopepunk climate fiction piece. It is 4,990 words long, written by Abby Rashid, she, her, hers. Abby Rashid is a grant writer for the Natural Resources Defense Council in Washington, D.C. Her writing has also appeared in the Silk Road Review and the Hartford Courant. And now the most important part of the entire podcast, the snack reveal. Which snack did I choose to pair with this climate fiction Hopepunk story? I had a snack and then Instagram intervened. I have a feeling that my algorithm is now tuned to like fun, cool snacks. And this might be a theme where I have a snack planned and then I change it because Instagram is like, hey, look at this really tasty thing. So this week I was introduced to a Southwest Virginia, specifically Roanoke, Virginia, traditional dish called cheese slaw. Think of like coleslaw, but take out the vegetables and replace it with cheese. Let me tell you, it was life-changing. Thank you, Instagram. I have lived in Southwest Virginia now for 7-8 years, and I had never heard of cheese slaw, but apparently it came from a local cookbook from the Junior League that they were selling for a charity event. And it's a classic staple here. So if you've been here for forever, you've probably had cheese slaw. For me, it's going to be a staple moving ahead. It was amazing. You put some jalapeno peppers in there, and I'm not somebody, I'm pretty basic. I don't love super, super spicy stuff, but like one jalapeno was the perfect heat level for me. You could totally add more if you like super spicy stuff. And it's really balanced super well because you've got the cheese and you've got mayo and you've got, banana peppers. Right. That's where like the tanginess comes in and it just, it's so good. I literally ate cheese slaw for a week straight because it made a huge batch. And I was not going to a party. So I ate cheese slaw with every imaginable dipping thing, but I think corn chip scoops were top choice. So I'm going to leave the recipe link in the show notes beneath this episode. Check it out. You're welcome. And now on to the story. Quick summary. A Seance in the Anthropocene is a story of a young girl set in the future after a large global event that is only referred to as the realignment. And what we find out throughout the story is that fossil fuels have gone by the wayside. We no longer use those, and the world is essentially like realigned to using renewable resources. And the children live in this kind of optimistic future of renewable resources. We follow this young Cherokee teenager who is going to a tribal school, a really elite school where she has to do a project for her class. And what she has decided is that she wants to put together kind of an oral history or a history documenting what happened before realignment. And the use of, specifically, they talk a lot about coal here. They do mention oil, but coal miners. And there are maybe one or two people left who remember the time before the realignment. And the aim of her project is to interview people and kind of just try to figure out how they got to that point and, their perspective. Because she had the history, the facts of realignment, and those things seem pretty standard in their world. But she wanted this kind of human view of it. And she was talking with her grandmother, who told her things about oil and coal that just seemed so wild to her, really, that people used to burn the byproducts of, not dinosaurs, they got technical about that it wasn't dinosaurs, but it was like the vegetation and things like that, and that they would burn that for power, and it was just normal. And you get this naive, I don't want to say naive with like a negative connotation, but naive in the way that children are, and the way that children have this hope and this beautiful view of the world before it becomes tainted. And that's what you see here. And this is really interesting perspective of this Cherokee teenager who's going around and interviewing people like her grandmother and like a coal miner, and just is completely blown away. She has no idea how to process this. And there's this beautiful through line of, she has this piece of coal, and for her, the piece of coal isn't just power or a dead rock. It is so much more, and it taps into kind of her ancestral beliefs and her native culture, where she sees kind of the souls of the creatures and of the plants, and just the connection to the earth that is symbolized, but also very really trapped inside that coal. And by the end, she has gone on this journey, and she goes and puts the coal to rest. She buries it in the site of one of the old mines. And it's just this really beautiful view of what could be. I think reading through, one of the things I love when I'm reading is when I don't fully align with a character, and I can look at them and be like, why is there this dissonance? And the author did such a good job of creating this character who just had such pure thoughts, that childhood innocence and hope for the world, because she lived in a world where, there were still problems. And there's this really cool undercurrent of what the realignment was and what some of the sacrifices and the shifts. And part of it was the Native communities building up strength, but also closing off in certain ways. And they grew as a power, but then they also created these elite boarding schools. And if you know anything about Native history, the history of boarding schools is extremely fraught. And in this story, we kind of explore that they saw that this was the option to bring hope to their future, and their community was to take their children and take the best and brightest from elsewhere and put them in these schools that would then raise them up in this ideology of care and the Native culture to take care of the earth and avoid the near disaster that they had just avoided one generation prior. And to see the shift in thinking, there's this really beautiful scene. It's one of my favorite things about this piece is where she goes to interview the coal miner. And he's this very, very old man. He's in his 90s, I think. And it didn't shy away from, she just asked the question straight up, like, how could you be complicit in what you knew was destroying the world? And this guy becomes the voice of us, where we're at currently in the world. And he had this mindset of, I didn't think I had that much to do with it. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I had it's so true. On an individual level, there are so many things that we all do. I explored this in a short story I wrote called Gig Economy, where it's this complicity in a system because we can't see the big picture. Like, we know it, but on a certain level, you need food, you need shelter. And if that means going into the coal mine and pulling out coal for the company that's paying you because it's the only thing you've ever known, then you can absolutely see how you got there. And then there was this dissonance because we're coming at it from this point of view of this child who's just like, I don't understand how you could do that. Like, how could you do this thing that you know was wrong? And they had this moment where he was like, I know you can't understand. And there was this unspoken, I hope you never understand. I hope you never have to understand that. And it was just, it was so good. It just really highlighted this difference that I loved of this emphasis on community in this future instead of the American rugged individualism that we're so steeped in. And you can see this man, this coal miner, he was also steeped in that. And you can see hints from her grandmother who remembered the time before, even though her grandmother was a huge, huge influence in the realignment and changing the future. You can see how it didn't come easy, but it was this shift from individualism and personal responsibility to community and community responsibility. And you do things or you don't do things because you are a part of a community. I just thought that was cool. And I think that this was a really good exploration of the past, which is our future, without it being a flat morality tale. You know, it was not like written for kids where it's like, ooh, oil and coal are so bad. We were allowed to have this real conversation with somebody where, as an adult reading this, I could go, yeah, I can see both sides. Yeah, I would love to be on the side where we don't have to use fossil fuels and all of those things, but I can see that too. And so I really love literature that can start these conversations and can show that maybe it feels radical. It feels really hard. It feels, like it needs a whole social movement that gets capitalized, the realignment. And the last thing on my bullet point list of things I loved about this piece was the realignment was never fully explained. We don't get the timeline of the events and what happens. There is no blueprint here that we can just print out and deliver to the White House and be like, hey, here's the plan. Let's just execute it. And now we're in the perfect future, because life doesn't work that way. Quite frankly, I think it's a better story for that, because it's one of those things that on a literary level, you don't ever want to over-explain things that your characters already know. And that was part of the point in the beginning, is that the girl wanted to do this project because she knew all about the realignment. She wanted to know the human side of things. She didn't want just the facts. So we never got just the facts, other than, really, really broad strokes. And I thought that was really a cool choice. And I think it makes for a better story, honestly. Circling around to kind of what I learned from this story is I think that the genre is definitely more clear to me after reading this story. Hopepunk is really, really hope above all else. This world is so radically different than ours, but it's still our world. And that's possible if we have that hope and that verve to dream up a world that is better than what we have, and to say, yeah, I am contributing to bad things, and how can I hope and dream to make it better, and not just throw my hands up and be like, oh, it is how it is. Guess I'll just be complicit in everything. And there's layers to it, but it really is punk to be so hopeful, to work towards something when everyone else is going to think you're crazy, to believe in a future that is better for everyone, that is better for our planet, that will sustain humanity in addition to the planet that we're on. Oh, I forgot. One of the things that was in this was just, they would talk about the extinctions of different like plants and animals. And it was usually just like a little throwaway line. Oh, it was beautiful. So good. Such a great way to world build by talking about it's our world, but it's different because she's never seen X animal or X plant because we killed them. They're gone. Yeah. So that was my little side caveat of really good world building. And in the end, how does this have anything to do with cheese slaw? I lucked out. And if you've listened to the podcast before, you know that I can make a stretch. I can make anything relate to anything. I feel like that is a very big skill I have as a writer and kind of as a creative person, but I did not have to work that hard to connect cheese slaw to a seance in the Anthropocene, because here's the deal. Cheese slaw is about community. It's about history. It's about preserving the good things, bringing people together. And that's a huge part of Hopepunk, is that community and bringing people together and preserving the good things in history. We're going to keep the cheese slaw and throw out the coal mining, Yes, this snack was amazing. The story was really great. I thought it was a really kind of upbeat, positive, fun way to start season 2. And I can't wait to hear your take on it. This story is free to read online. I will leave the link in the show notes as well. And you should reach out. I have a brand spanking new sparkly website that I've worked so hard on. And you can find me there at lizjbradley.com. It's got links to all my social media. We don't have dedicated social media for Sci-Fi Snacks yet because honestly, I don't want to run another social media account. I'm trying to cut back on my own social media usage. So we can chat science fiction and snacks on my accounts. I am mostly on Threads or Blue Sky. Both of them I am at Liz J. Bradley. Try to keep it simple. Tag me. Let me know your thoughts. Have you ever had cheese slaw? Or does your local area have a traditional community snack or party dish? Let me know. I want to try them. Maybe I'll make one for a future episode. You never know. So I'll see you next week where we will be diving into steampunk with the comic book Monstress #1. You are in for a ride. And if I can leave you with one thing, if you're feeling kind of hopeless in all of this and you're looking for your little piece of hope, one of the things that you can do, other than reaching out to people in your local community, donating to mutual aid and things like that, is you can support the NRDC so they can create more projects like this. And you can find their mission on their website. That is nrdc.org. And go help out our National Resources Defense Council. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you next week. Bye.